All right, I'm Melissa Watley. I'm a tax attorney with Frost Law, and I'm very excited today because I had Dan, who's also with Frost Law. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about what kind of law you practice?
Thanks, Alyssa. My name's Dan Staeven. I am the director of the Bankruptcy Practice here at Frost Law. I have a staff of 2 attorneys and a paralegal. We are expanding. Bankruptcy is my area of practice, but it does intersect quite a bit with tax, and I have filed a lot of cases that have to deal with tax issues.
Yeah, I want to say back in the day, I too was a bankruptcy attorney, and I have gone to I don't know if it's the dark or the light side, tax controversy. And there are things I love about tax controversy, and there's things I miss about bankruptcy. Like I love tax controversy because I never have to go to court. I hate tax controversy for the same reason. Sometimes you want to go to court and you want a quick solution and you want finality. And with the Internal Revenue Service, you don't always get those court opportunities. There's only certain ways to get there. And sometimes you're just dealing with IRS employees, and that's really frustrating. And the bankruptcy, remember, you can just file a motion and be in front of a federal judge pretty easily if you want to. On that note, when I was doing bankruptcy back, I started bankruptcy, I think it was like 9-10 era. It was booming. I mean, we were filing cases left and right and all over the place, obviously, because of 2008. And then over the years, it kind of slowed down and less people were getting back on their feet and everything was recovering. And even in the pandemic, I feel like we didn't really see a huge tidal wave of bankruptcies, but I think that's changing. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, of course. I'd love to talk about that. The times that you mentioned, that 2008 to 2010, it was a big boom for bankruptcy filings. At the time, I was working for a firm that was doing a creditor side practice that had a lot of foreclosures. And so I learned that side of the aisle. But now we're into a new era in bankruptcy filings. Pandemic caused a significant amount of money to be flooded into small businesses, into other types of programs with the CARES Act. And now that money's over. And there are a lot of people that are coming to us for bankruptcy help, whether it be they've been laid off from the federal government, or they've run out of money for the EIDL loans for their small businesses, some of which they guaranteed. And that, along with just the general economic conditions, are causing the bankruptcy practice to really expand, which is why actually we took on another attorney recently to expand our practice.
Yeah, I think people always have this negative connotation of bankruptcy, or this misconception that the reason people file bankruptcy is because they're bad money managers. And being a bankruptcy and tax lawyer for so many years, I think sometimes it is a lack of education and a lack of knowledge. But a lot of times there's factors, public policy factors, the way in which America functions, institutional, fallacies, or, sometimes it's of our own creation. Like some people cannot budget their way out of a low wage job. It's just in this day and age when inflation is so high, cost of living is so high. There's only a certain way people are like, oh, do you buy your bootstraps, create a budget. It's like $30K is not something that you can live on. In most places in the United States, 40, 50. You have children with daycare expenses. It used to be, I remember doing budgets. So in bankruptcy, just for people that have never filed bankruptcy, not familiar, we do the same thing in tax when we're negotiating payment plans with the IRS. We're looking at what your income is and what your expenses are. And I can recall in my mind in 2008, 9, 10, doing these financial statements and rent being like $800, $900, under $1,000. Mortgage payments being around $1,000. Car payments being like $250, $300, right? I'm not seeing anything like that anymore. And it is such a weird thing to have done this work for 10 or 15 years and see the drastic increase in the cost of living. Do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, you've probably been doing this work longer than me, but it seems kind of crazy when I think about it.
I recall back when I started in 2004, the common rent payment or a mortgage payment was reasonably between $500 and $1,000.
Yeah.
Now, just a little bit over 20 years later, and with interest rates, we're talking about a wide disparity in rent versus mortgages, depending upon the type of property you have and all of that. We could be looking at $1,500, $2,000 for rent and $3,000 to $4,000 on a mortgage, or potentially more on a rent. And so you're right, the economic conditions that we find ourselves in right now It's very difficult for a family, especially a family with children. There's a spouse of the debtor. There's expenses that are, of course, necessary if both adults are going to be working, that just like they did back then, and probably pretty similar in that factor, is that you have to make a certain amount to be able to make it work,
Right.
a certain amount to make it both for one of the two adults to be outside of the home. And so that is a big factor. I've noticed that over the years, and I seem to recall the median income when that started around 2005, 2006, when we were doing the means test kind of analysis, the amount to qualify for Chapter 7 now and the amount to qualify for Chapter 7 then is drastically different. So there is some recognition that somebody with a lower income can qualify for Chapter 7. Recently, and it's been actually this way the entire time I've been practicing, you can be from anywhere from $20 under budget and be in the negative $20, or some people are as far as $600 and $700 in the negative. The numbers have changed, wages have changed, but of course, as it's been reported everywhere, with inflation and with the supply line issues and things like that during COVID, expenses have drastically outpaced salary increases, drastically.
I know, and it just feels so bad, when I talk to people, oftentimes we're trying to solve their tax problem. And even if I solve, and I think that's where people like, oh, I have IRS debt. And so a lot of times when people come to me, they have an IRS problem, but the IRS problem is a sign of a different problem. Like they're having a financial issue. If it's not like an audit issue or a tax court, or whether the liability is correct or not, if it's a collection issue. When we start getting into the financials, and a lot of times it's a cash flow problem where they can't afford their necessary living expenses. They can't necessarily move anywhere else. I'm seeing a lot of people that have no retirement, no savings. They're living paycheck to paycheck on 100K, maybe 150K, even 200K, depending on how many people are in a family, depending on what city they're living in. I'm always very upfront with people that watch me on TikTok or whatever about, I spend $4,000 a month on daycare. Not anymore. My kids just got into public school. Thank God. But $4,000 a month for two kids to go to daycare is more than a mortgage. And the only reason we were able to afford that is because I'm a working lawyer and my husband, a physician assistant who works for a pharmaceutical industry. Like not many people could afford to do that. And it wasn't like some fancy private school daycare. It's just basic care that was offered for a long range of time, which is like, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or something like that. So when you break it down by the hour, it's actually the cheapest option. Some people end up having so many kids they have to hire a nanny. That's $50,000 or $60,000 a year, because what are you going to do? 2,000 times 4 children. Now they're at $8,000 a month just for childcare. And so, I think it's these kind of rising costs. The 2-family household. I think Elizabeth Warren wrote a book about this. I have not read a book. Maybe you have. Elizabeth, she's from the bankruptcy world, right? And so a lot of the bankruptcy laws and stuff are, I think, influenced by Elizabeth Warren because she has a bankruptcy background. But the 2-income trap, it's like you have to have 2 incomes these days to survive in America, the cost of living for most people, especially if you have kids. But then if you do the math on it, sometimes you can't afford to make it work when 2 people work because they can't afford the childcare. And then even when they're in elementary school, it's like school starts at 7, they're out at 2. What are you going to do? Then you still have childcare costs. So it is really difficult. And I feel really bad when people come to me. And it's just so interesting. Like I had a single mom in Miami that contacted me about a tax issue. And I was like, well, maybe you'll be in a payment plan. Like, when you get these target numbers in your mind and you ran the numbers so many times, you kind of always know what the answer is. Your income's this, you have this, blah, blah, blah. I was like, maybe she'll be, in some kind of partial pay installment agreement. And I ran the numbers. She was single. By the time I factored in like rent, daycare in Miami, all the things, she was negative, 6 figures negative. It's her current taxes. It's really hard. I think some people think that it's their fault that they have to file bankruptcy. There's this like negative connotation. And I'm always like, it's there for a reason. We know the leading cause, many years, is medical debt, divorce. What's some of our other ones that you see? Job loss, obviously.
Job loss is one. I would say a failed business is another. Right now, a failed business with the economic injury disaster loan from the SBA and a guarantee of that.
The personal guarantees on the SBA loans?
Are they dischargeable? Yes, they are. I have not had, although I've seen other horror stories of people who did not use the loan properly and invested or did other things where they, at the meeting of creditors, they've had to answer to the United States trustee who asked questions about this particular debt? It's my recommendation that they not answer those questions at the 341, because if they've done something that I've not heard of, I usually do a pretty good, thorough investigation of how they use those funds before I'll file them for a bankruptcy and try to get a discharge. But sometimes those answers provide more problems than they do help in 341. But that's quite a different problem. Medical bills, you said, that's a big deal. I think right now, as we've been talking about this, I think just the outpacing the pace and the cost of regular everyday things, groceries. I'm the main grocery buyer in my house, and I choose to go to the cheaper places. It's still not easy.
Yeah, that's a good point to make when we're talking about debt. I'm seeing a lot of regular everyday expense. So when I used to see people's credit cards, because we look at people's financials every day, right? You get really good at it. You can tell what people do. I could recreate someone's weekend from looking at their bank statements. Don't even need to tell me what you did. I know because I looked at your bank statements. But what I used to see was like large dollar purchases. I used to see a lot of overconsumption, high-end consumption. Now, when I look at people's stuff, I'm seeing everyday expenses on there. Not always. I still have some people that are going rogue.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see a lot more people with putting everyday living expenses on credit cards, right?
Yep.
At like 27% interest. And then also, I don't know if you've seen this, but do you know you can affirm DoorDash?
No, and I don't want this type of issue to get out to anyone in my family because of their habitual use of DoorDash. And Affirm is a company that will allow you to pay over time. So your standard DoorDash order for $50 could be 2 payments of $25 or 2.5 payments of $25 with a $12.50 service charge for paying it out over a period of time. That's, again, a choice. Financial literacy. So we don't really have a good program for financial literacy in this country. We have the angry, condemning Dave Ramsey people out there, and we have other people that are on this platform that talk about financial management. But generally speaking, we don't have a good idea of how to manage the money. Now, it's probably, like you said before, impossible to manage on $30,000 to $40,000 a year as a family of 4. It's also impossible to manage on a 6-figure income with a family of 4 when you're not managing it properly or you've never been taught how to manage these things properly.
Oh, I call it more money, more problems.
Well, being close to Annapolis, I like to believe that because I like to see the economies of scale with all of that. Somebody that has problems at $20,000 worth of debt usually is making $50,000 to $75,000. Somebody with $200,000 is usually making $400,000 to $600,000 a year, which is fine. It's economies of scale. Financial education is so important. Experience is so important, and just your basic budgeting. One of my greatest lessons as a younger person was to write down everything I spent money on in any one given day to see where the money went. And just that will give you an idea of how to save yourself money. Not going to the convenience store for something, but rather going to the grocery store for it where it would be cheaper. Right. Breaking it down and buying something bigger in bulk as opposed to one at a time at a convenience store, something like that is a great lesson to learn. But again, we don't have that kind of financial literacy here in this country.
I always wonder, this is not to be a conspiracy theorist, but you think it's by design, Dan? It's very easy to make money off people and charge them interest and fees if the people don't understand the interest and the fees.
Yeah, I think as an ex-military guy, I've been on military bases with people who were selling services and products to military members that prey on them. They prey on that. That's why every shopping center outside of a military base has, a pawn shop or a benefit finance or something like that. Or one of those kind of places. It's because we don't educate. Not at all.
I'm from Atlanta, and we're one of the biggest filers of bankruptcy in the country. At the 11th Circuit, Northern District of Georgia, we're huge. I would be in the car listening to radio ads, and it's like pawn shops, payday loans, tidal loans, all of those things. And then people would come in, and I remember being a young lawyer. I worked in the Hateville office down by the airport, and I would call it like bankruptcy ER. It was my first law job. I think before I passed the bar, but like I was waiting to get my bar results. And so I was drafting petitions. And we would walk in and we would say, if you have a repossession, a foreclosure, wage garnishment, raise your hand. The waiting room would be packed. And then we'd work those cases. And we would do their bankruptcy while they're sitting in our office. They would go to a different room and do credit counseling, and then they'd come back. I remember like going over some documents with this woman. I was like, you bought the car. I was like, how much did you buy the car for? And she was like, well, I bought it for $10,000 and I've been paying on it since then. And I was like, you start asking them about the interest rate, and like could tell that she didn't know. She thought she bought it for $10,000, but by the end of it, she really bought it for like $30,000, right? Mm-hmm. Because by the time they added interest. And so we had these places that would prey on people. They knew that they couldn't go get a regular car loan. So they would sell them these really crappy cars with these huge interest rates, and they couldn't pay them. Then they would turn the car off, and then they would repo the car and then sell that car again and again and again and again, right? So it's a great business model if you don't care about people. So, in seeing all that in Atlanta was so heartbreaking. And that's why I'm like, sometimes like, is it by design? I mean, we have credit counseling. If people don't know, before you file bankruptcy, you are required to take a credit counseling course. But again, that's kind of too late. I mean, it's great. I mean, the purpose of it is right to not have people go back into bankruptcy because they didn't get that education. But I mean, you can do credit counseling like 0.4 minutes and not really learn anything. We've all experienced it. We'll walk people through it. I do think, yes, education is a big part of it because I see it a lot even with the higher net worth people. I live in a pretty, I would say, affluent neighborhood, and a neighbor had reached out and they had an issue. And I started like running through their numbers with them. And, it's like, well, we've got the Range Rover car payment. We've got the BMW car payment. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know how you're doing that. I don't have any car payments because I'm not a car person. I think bankruptcy makes you not a car person.
Not at all. The thing that you didn't mention in that whole analysis is the negative equity that people roll over into their next new car. That's the big thing for higher wage earners, is they roll that negative equity into the next car. And it can be, I've seen it as high as $80,000 of negative equity when they finally had to say, listen, no more. They keep them on a lower payment and they're going to have them paying for years. It's the credit card for car payments. It's crazy. And I've seen it. I'm not a car person either. And so I see Range Rovers or other types of cars that are higher end, and I just shake my head. I don't know that I need something like that to get from point A to point B. I'm clearly not going to be in a car with the top down, I'm burning my head off, but I'm certainly not going to be driving something that like a Tesla Cybertruck or something like that. I'm just not going to. I have a rule. My first house was $125,000. I'm not ever going to buy a car that is worth more than $125,000. Matter of fact, I've not ever bought one worth more than $40,000. And I don't want to ever do that.
I was lucky enough to be gifted a car. My dad bought me like a cash Pontiac Grand Am. They don't even make those anymore. I remember, you'll like this story. The internet will love this story. I remember I eventually passed the bar, and then I went and worked at another bankruptcy mill because, I just love mills. They gave me like 3 federal courtrooms like the day I passed the bar. They're like, these are yours, Simba. And I would have like 40 hearings a day. People writing in like, I paid my mortgage. Don't take my house. Don't lift the stay. And these people walk in, and God bless them. They maybe had about 3 teeth between the 2 of them. And it was a motion for relief from stay. So if people don't know what that is, you can file bankruptcy. But if your creditors are undersecure and you haven't been paying, like you bought a brand new car and you haven't made any payments, I call it the bankruptcy bubble, right? It protects you. It prevents creditors from taking action against you, from garnishing you, from repossessing. It pauses all those actions. You're in this little bubble. But if you haven't made any payments and you are way behind and they don't feel like their collateral is sufficient in the bankruptcy, they can ask the court to lift the stay and repossess their, but it's a court order. I'm saying a thing which I miss because it was like, it felt like Judge Judy every day. Right? It's just entertaining. And here I am with my like busted ass Pontiac. The mirror is taped on because I think I hit something and my dad wouldn't fix it. I'm a lawyer. The people in bankruptcy with the 4 teeth between the 2 of them are in a brand new Beamer, like $100,000 Beamer. And then I was like, this is why we're here. Like there's times like that. And the judge was so not nice. She was like, why do y'all need this car? And they like, we need this car because we're doing delivery. And she was like, you can deliver stuff in a Honda Civic. You don't need a brand new Beamer. And then she lifted the stay and the creditor got that car back. But things like that would happen. It's just not right.
I've had cases where, actually, it's been a couple of years now, that he had a Bentley and a McLaren. And then the wife drove the Bentley, which is, I don't understand why you would drive the Bentley anyway, given how gas is and how expensive that car is. And then they had a Mini Cooper. About 10 years ago, I looked into buying a Mini Cooper and I was scared away because it was too expensive. I didn't want that kind of burden. Maybe it's my hope every time I file bankruptcy that somebody has learned something from this situation, has learned from their conversation with me, has learned from the intake, that a little bit of discernment in what we purchase, a little bit of holding back that initial urge to buy, to analyze it a little bit more off maybe a clearer head would be a better way of handling this. I have had clients come back again that were trying to save houses and things like that failed out of a case, but it's my hope that I never do a Chapter 7 for somebody, and I haven't in 20 years, that has to come back to me to file another Chapter 7. I hope they learned.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we all will. How did you learn personal finance? Because I think there's a lot of young people on the app. I think the education part of it is important. And with the internet, there's a lot of education to be had out there. So how did you learn personal finance?
Well, I learned it probably a lot like people are learning it now, through trial and error. My early 20s, having been a situation where a relationship broke up and I took on all the debt, it took 3 or 4 years to dig myself out. Into another relationship, I found that my partner was more of a spender than I was. And so changes had to happen there. And now I find that my partner and I are on a more of an even keel. We're on the same path. We want to retire and we want to be able to be comfortable when we retire, and we don't want to carry debt with us. Each time we use a credit card for household expenses, that credit card is paid off each month. Particularly, this is the best lesson I learned. I learned that true wealth for me is having money the day before payday.
I like that.
That's not what happens for everybody. Sometimes they get paid on a Friday and on Wednesday they got nothing. And I find having money on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and not really worrying about it is true wealth, because I don't have to worry about where something's coming from. And so I learned at a certain point to live within my means. I learned to delay gratification, and I learned to make sensible choices as opposed to emotional. I truly understood the words need and want. That was a big lesson to learn too.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, my dad was a credit analyst for Home Depot, so he used to get loans. I was like, Dad, do you just sit in a room all day and hit yes or no? And he was like, I analyze things more than that, because he did commercial lending. Mm-hmm. So my dad taught me. I remember I think it was a Victoria's Secret credit card in high school. I don't know when can you get credit cards. That's the other thing. Young people don't understand how credit cards work. So I think I got one. I put something on it. I had to be a freshman at UGA. My mom owned her own business. So my mom owned a roller rink for 20, 30 years. Ran a business. I remember they would give me a little bit of money because I had a scholarship, and I was out of money, and I worked at a bar. But I remember I got the credit card, and I think I didn't pay it on time. And then I was out of money, and the both of them flew up to UGA. I mean, they could drive, but they were there. And I remember them sitting me down and be we're not giving you any more money. So this is the amount of money you get. You're going to have to figure it out. And then hand budgeting, doing the registering the checkbook, doing all those things. And I got yelled. I mean, I was in trouble. Even in law school, I decided I was going to go to law school. And my mom was like, I will help you. She had a business. She's like, I'll give you a loan. My whole law school only costs $40,000. She's like, if you work and go to law school at night, I'll help you with the loan. You pay for your living expenses, and I'll give you a loan for my business. First year of law school, I was like, I hate law school. This is boring. It's not fun. I just want to go work at Sephora. I want to work at Sephora so bad. So I call her, and the businesswoman that she is, I was like, I'm just going to quit and I'm going to go work at Sephora, and I'm going to follow my dreams and do makeup. And my mom's like, that's cool and all. Why don't you go home and look at your loan agreement, and then you can call me back? I was like, excuse you? So I get home, I look at this loan. I mean, she owned like a company, and my mom's not the only owner of her company. She has co-owners. And it literally said if I didn't graduate, that the whole loan became like due and payable to the company on this date. And she was like, we will enforce this loan. So why don't you graduate and then you can do whatever you want to do? Okay, I guess I will graduate. And I had to pay her interest. I mean, it treated me like any other. Thank God for tax laws, right? It was a bona fide loan. There was an amortization schedule. I paid it back. But they forced me to work and go to, they didn't force me. She was like, if this is your dream, you need to work and go to law school at night. You need to go to a part-time program. You don't spend. I think that was really helpful to have parents that were like, follow your dreams, but don't burden yourself to the point. I think I'll be like that with my kids. For, again, taking out student loans, I think that's just another thing that is burdening so many people in my generation, where it's like they were told this promise, like work hard, get good grades, go to these great colleges, and then you'll make a lot of money. And it's like, I don't know, starting out in your 30s with $250,000 of student loans is disastrous. I mean, that's a hard hole to climb out of, even in the legal profession. If I wanted to quit being a lawyer today because I hated being a lawyer, I could. I'm not beholden to a student loan. And I feel like sometimes in professions like doctors, lawyers, dentists, they feel committed to stay because they're stuck or they feel stuck.
Right. Well, I think that it was a great lesson for me to learn to finance myself. I had to finance my entire education myself, my undergrad and my law school. My mother passed away when I was in my second year of law school. And so the finances changed significantly in my household. And so I didn't get any contribution, but I know the benefits of getting scholarships because my oldest has been out of college for a while, but got scholarships to Florida State, where it was first 2 years of community college were free, second 2 years were 75%. I paid $15,000 total.
That's great.
That for a college education, that's spectacular. But when I got out of law school in 2004, I had $125,000 worth of debt that I had to pay, and actually didn't even have as much income as I had prior to going to law school. My last year of working, I made twice what I was making when I first got out of law school, $100K to $52,500.
That's crazy.
It was crazy, but we made it and we made the payments work, and I've not been in default this whole time. But I think that's the nature of people's situations too. They get a large amount of credit card debt or even, frankly, medical bills make it difficult for them to be able to pay those student loans. It's my belief that the student loan process is going to tick up. And there's going to be a lot of Treasury involvement in that. So that means necessarily Treasury being involved, meaning that they can take federal funds, they can go straight to your bank account. So you're going to want to think about filing bankruptcy in any of those situations and then getting back on track with some kind of payment plan with those student loans. It's something that's a big problem as well. Financial literacy is one thing, but paying people for an expensive college education to go do a $50,000 or $60,000 a year job, they don't compute there.
It makes sense anymore. You know what? There's opportunity costs to doing certain things. My husband went to PA school, which is like a doctor, except it's a lot quicker. I think he started school after me, graduated before me, and then immediately made more money than me. So I was like, in what world did I really mess up my life? Because my job salary is my first mill that I worked at was $40,000, $50,000 out of law school. It's the first year associate. That's what it was, 2015. And so my husband was in PA school, and I remember this physician really liked him because my husband was doing cardiothoracic surgery. And he was like, you need to go to med school. You need to become a surgeon. You need to do all these things. I think he just loved that my husband was a good PA and saw that he could probably be a great surgeon. But his PA school didn't cost that much. It was $80,000 or something. I actually paid off his student loans when I started my own business. But he helped me with my last semester of law school, and then I turned around and helped him later. We could trade off and on, But the moral of the story was he was sad because it was a status thing. He was like, people are always going to see me as a PA, and I'm not a physician. And should I go get this degree? And I said, let's do some opportunity costs. So what I did is I was like, what will it cost you to go to med school? What income will you forego? what kind of investments would you have made if you're making six figures as a PA, investing in retirement? He was working at a hospital where he's getting a pension. In the numbers, I was like, this is not going to flip in your favor until you're 55. At that point, that's when, had he just stayed as a PA and kept investing and kept working, it would have flipped and he would have been on the other side of that where it was then a good decision. And I was like, are you going to be happy? So I think a lot of times people don't do the opportunity cost. I think as a tax lawyer, the coolest thing that I've seen is people making literally bukus amounts of money without a college education, without any degrees, with a high school education, just because they started a business or they saw an opportunity in the market or they educated themselves about this niche. You know, one guy was like, well, I make metal shelves for Amazon warehouses and I'm making $6 million a year. And it's like, who would have thought of that? So I think there's a lot of paths to financial success, and young people should understand like the trades.
Yes. Welders and or plumbers, mechanics of any sort, those things are a dying breed, and they are paying, and they have pensions and they have stock programs. You can begin to save right as you get started. It's lost on the generation that believed college was the only way to make it. And we need to normalize something like the trades or like being an entrepreneur for people that want to get away from that kind of student loan debt that burdens people. We'll look at those opportunity costs and realize that, maybe a college education isn't all it's cracked up to be. And maybe working a solid job where you progress and you get more, whatever it is, maybe licensure or electricians, things like that. Things that can be, won't be taken over by AI. You're going to need those kinds of things. I think that if we haven't already missed the opportunity, we need to be talking more about that for our kids and their kids and those generations so that they can avoid some of the pitfalls that we've been discussing today.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to be adaptable. Higher education is going to have to change. But I also feel like it's a fuel thing. It's like they allow government student loans and then the universities go up, and it's just a cycle of things. It's just wild that 18-year-olds are allowed to just take out that amount of money without really understanding the consequences of how much the government can take from you. People are always surprised with the IRS. Like, what do you mean they can hit my retirement account? It's the federal government. Like, yeah, a credit card company can't hit your retirement account, but the service can,
I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen it post-bankruptcy filing where they discharge a significant amount of taxes, but because they have $25,000 in their protected retirement account, after the fact, you have to negotiate with the service to get a offer in compromise for a certain amount out of that retirement vehicle, which then you have to pay tax on.
Oh, I know. So what I always say to the government when we're going to take your client's retirement account, I'm like, well, we're not about to take it out ourselves. You can come get it because you can avoid the 10% early withdrawal penalty if they force take it. Yeah. There is no world in which you can come get it. And then sometimes they don't, right? Because it's actually a lot of hoops for them to do it. It really depends on who you get. But yeah, I've had that happen. When I talk to people, a lot of them assume, because we can take this back to tax and bankruptcy, but the personal finance conversation is so interesting to a lot of people because there's so many people looking for just any kind of advice on how to, the earlier you start and the more you pay attention to it, the faster you can get out of it and get back on the right path. But bankruptcy is a great tool when you're in too deep. Right? I love bankruptcy because you can deal with a lot of issues at once, and people are surprised that taxes can be included in that. Now, obviously, there are types of taxes like employment tax, specifically the trust fund portion, which is like if you own a business and you took your employees' money out of their paycheck and they didn't give it to the government, that wouldn't be dischargeable. But regular old income tax has rules. There's a 3-year rule. It has to be due at least 3 years of filing bankruptcy. That's 240 days before, and then filed at least 2 years prior to filing. And then there's the other rule. I call them the other rules, which is if the government really doesn't like you, and I would love your thoughts on this. This is how I always see it in my mind. There's objective rules. Time is objective. The dischargeability objective rules are very easy to calculate. But if the government doesn't like you and they really want to make your debt not dischargeable, they have two other ways to get you. They are willful evasion and fraud. Right? And fraud is never dischargeable, whether it comes to the IRS or any other creditor, or you defrauded the SBA with your EIDL loan, which is what you were talking about earlier. How many cases of willful evasion? I've only had like 2 or 3 in my lifetime. Have you had any willful evasion tax cases?
Well, I am having been in a tax firm for the past 6 years. I've heard of it. I've seen some of the cases that people have had with that and probably had to advise them against bankruptcy for that particular type of situation. But when I've talked to somebody and gotten the facts straight and reviewed the transcripts appropriately, I've not had that kind of issue in a bankruptcy case. I have had, and there's some case law out there, I was on the losing end of the hanging paragraph tax return issues in a Chapter 13 in the Western District of Virginia, where the IRS issues those proof of claims, and I'm sure you've seen the proof of claim. The first bucket is secure, the second one is priority. Those two have to get paid during the pendency, specifically a Chapter 13 or maybe even a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But then there's the general unsecured. Those are the ones that are going to be dischargeable. Well, based on that 3.2 and 240 analysis, any years that qualify under that go into the general unsecured unless they're fines or penalties.
Right.
But they fall into that. And if they're secured, they don't. But they fall into that. And one of the things that fell into it with this particular case was a substitute for return.
Mm-hmm.
And that substitute for return, it was my argument, not at all supported by the Internal Revenue Manual or bankruptcy law, but just something of a flyer in front of a judge in the Western District of Virginia, that the IRS should tell you and should move an SFR like that that's going to be non-dischargeable and move it into priority so that it gets paid.
Mm-hmm.
We should be able to direct the funds to that.
Yeah.
And we're talking through a couple of cases here in the department about these kind of situations, and I've suggested to some of the other staff that work with me that perhaps we use a non-standard provision to govern the IRS's application of this payment if they can be ordered to do so under a confirmed plan, and I believe that they can. That's a solve for that problem, but generally speaking, taxes that fall within that 3.2 and 240, it's a good way to talk to people about bankruptcy and the benefits of bankruptcy. Specifically saying my big selling point for 13 over an IRS workout is you can prioritize your tax payments over the credit card payments because they're of a higher priority in the bankruptcy code. The IRS, it gets paid in a 5-year plan, whereas the credit cards don't, and you come out ahead at the end of the day, provided, of course, you stay compliant.
Gotta stay in. That's the hard part on the 13s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what's hard. I did a lot of Chapter 13s. I mean, obviously, everybody prefers a 7. Yeah. Everybody loves a good 7. If people don't know the difference between a 7 and a 13 is, do you want to tell them really quickly the difference between a Chapter 7 and a 13 and maybe when you would want to use each one?
Chapter 7 is a total liquidation. In the case of where I practice, sometimes it can be done for tax debt that is above the amount of unsecured other debt, using the fact that taxes are called non-consumer debt. And we have filed a number of cases where people have been in that situation and been able to discharge the tax debt. But then there's the Chapter 13, which is a reorganization, a payment plan. And as I mentioned before, it's a good use of that time to pay off priority or secured tax debt and really not have to pay anything towards credit cards through your regular monthly trustee payment.
Yeah. I mean, I think Chapter 13s are great if you can't get in the 7. I also do love a good non-consumer Chapter 7 case. I think it's underutilized. So, generally people have to be under that certain dollar threshold. Yep. You have to do what's called a means test. And so you have to qualify for a Chapter 7. If you make too much money, you sometimes can't file one. But for taxes or non-consumer debts, and if you got more than 50%, you can get in the 7. I mean, I've seen people getting 7s, 6-figure income.
Yeah.
Get 7. Depends on the trustee, depends on where you are.
Even insofar as analysis of the expenses and the income, I&J of the bankruptcy schedules, if I has a certain amount of income, and even in a non-consumer 7, A can have some positive income. I've seen it as high as $2,500 each month. Whether it being a trustee or some other creditor can't change the law that if you avoid the means test, you don't have to be insolvent. That non-consumer debt and or business debt is allowed to be discharged without going through that kind of rigorous analysis of median income and insolvency.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. But a lot of bankruptcy attorneys, sometimes I bring it up to them and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you're not using that? So that's one of the best tools in the toolkit.
It is. The foundation of our practice is based on those kinds of situations, whether it be a referral from your department, the tax department, or a referral from another attorney. that doesn't want to handle some kind of case like this. We live for cases like this to be able to tell somebody, yeah, you can save your house and you can file bankruptcy and not have to prove the means test and not have to be insolvent. It's an underutilized tool to help people resolve in a lot of cases. And of course, it's all based on the facts.
Yep.
Those facts are important. Those facts drive how the bankruptcy code applies.
So I think it's important for everyone to know if you got a federal tax matter, Frost Law can represent you nationwide, so we can take on federal tax disputes, state tax disputes. But bankruptcy does have state-specific rules and exemptions, and so you generally have to file where you live. So Dan, do you want to talk about what areas we serve with bankruptcy specifically?
Sure. I am licensed in Maryland, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have an additional attorney here who, in addition to being barred in Maryland, is also barred in all the districts of Pennsylvania. So that's another state that we can add to our service area. We are attempting to get all of our attorneys registered within the federal bar of DC to handle DC cases. And we are still always looking for other small firms to join with us to be able to expand this practice, not only further into Virginia, but also, if we can, further into other areas, specifically like the Northeast.
Yeah, great.
Mid-Atlantic, Northeast.
So I always get this question because as a tax lawyer, I do the whole variety of options. Like, look, we have so many things in our toolkit. We have tax resolution, we have installment agreements, offers and compromise, currently non-collectible, and it always being a bankruptcy. And immediately, you know what? They're like, I don't want to file bankruptcy. I can't do it. I'm so embarrassed. My neighbors are going to know. Everyone's going to know. It's going to be embarrassing. And it's like, who in your life is running pacer searches? And they're always concerned about their credit. And then my favorite thing to say is bankruptcy is here for a reason. Like, the laws are here for a reason. And, the president's done it a few times. So if he can't do it, what's the big deal? How do you address people being embarrassed or concerned about then people finding out that they're filing bankruptcy? And on that note, can you please cover what their employer will think if they have a lease?
So shame is a pretty big topic in all of this. Shame is pervasive. It gets to the point of where people don't want to do anything to solve this problem. My approach is, this is a shame-free zone. We don't judge you. What you say to us is 100% confidential. The documents that you submit to us are going to be uploaded confidentially and 100% secure. So nobody's going to be able to see that. Nobody knows. And you mentioned first about the pacer searches. The bad part about this, and the thing that you need to know, is that bankruptcy is public record. However, that public record is hidden beyond some people, and especially hidden within an amount of bureaucracy that some people won't choose to go through. Now, I believe that making the choice and making the decision to file bankruptcy is a business decision. Your financial life is a business. It's not supposed to be emotional. Can be, but it's not supposed to be. And sometimes, if I find that the situation warrants it, if I find that perhaps the shame might be a little bit too much for somebody, they had a failed business and they're just feeling bad about all this stuff, I tell them that I filed bankruptcy as an adult, as a 50-year-old adult. I filed bankruptcy based on a failed business. And it's not a bad thing to file. What it is it's a restart. It's a restart of your financial life. It's a restart of your credit. It's a restart of being able to take a deep breath and not have to worry about your finances. Once you know that discharge is entered, once you are able to manage your finances a little bit better post-bankruptcy, I believe that this is not the worst thing you can do. In fact, it's the best thing you can do to change the narrative, the financial narrative for yourself, so that you're able to recover from this. When it comes to making changes, I think this whole process points out the kind of things that you can afford to do and the kind of things that you cannot afford to do. And that knowledge is priceless for your financial recovery.
I think it provides some breathing room, right? Kind of gives you this fresh start. My favorite thing about bankruptcy, it's for the honest but unfortunate debtor, and the guidelines behind it are the fresh start. And also the IRS uses the term fresh start for its programs, right? The IRS Fresh Start program, because I do think it's just such a burden that's been lifted from people when they have that breathing room and they're not scrambling to pay all these credit cards all the time. I always tell people, I know you're like embarrassed or whatever, but it's not emotional. It's a little financial business. Like, who cares what people think? All that matters is that you're happy, you're healthy, and it doesn't really matter what other people think. I had one taxpayer. I like to give a lot of solutions for people. And so I was like, you can file bankruptcy. You could also choose, they wanted to save a home, and it was like $60,000 in arrears. And the home was already too expensive. So it's like, yeah, you can file Chapter 13. You could save this home. Do you still want to have that feeling? And like, they didn't need this huge home. They're older, like their kids are gone. So it's like, another option is you sell the home. Like, before it goes in foreclosure, you sell it and you downsize and you have a bunch of equity and you move on. And he was like, but my wife loves the house. And so a lot of times I feel like we're not judgmental over here, but also we're not emotional. I was like, wouldn't that be nice if you have no mortgage, you're free, you don't have all these things tying you down, you're not struggling. So I think that's an important thing about having a qualified licensed attorney addressing any issue. A lot of people end up going to these nationwide tax resolution firms or these nationwide debt relief agencies, right? Like, not formal payment plans. The thing that I always tell people is, on their websites, it says this is not tax, legal, or bankruptcy advice. Then what are you paying for? If you're not getting any of those things.
Actually, I came from that world. Before I went to law school, I was a credit counselor. So I know what they're looking for. I know what they sell towards, and I know how that all works. I think eliminating the shame and being a calm, rational voice to them is very important to a client. It isn't, I don't get out of any 1 week without somebody telling me, you know what, I'm glad I talked to you. I'm glad we reasoned this out. I'm glad we looked at other choices and other options and what we have to do to move forward and to get that fresh start and begin our financial recovery, because I was afraid to make this call. I was afraid to have a conversation with somebody, but you made it so much easier.
Yeah, I always find that the hardest call with tax or bankruptcy, because we get a lot of similar things. We do a lot of tax controversy, so a lot of people are having issues with the IRS. It's just picking up the phone. Like, they're so stressed out and they're so embarrassed. I was talking to some of our intake team that answers the phones about what it's like, because I've played every role in a law firm. I was a receptionist, I was a paralegal, and I went to law school, now I'm a lawyer, and I have my own firm, and now I'm with this firm. And I was like, do you know how hard it is for people to pick up that phone and just call? That phone feels like it's 1,000 pounds. And then after we get into it and we start talking about it, they're like, oh, I feel so much better. I'm like, yeah, we got you. Like, again, there's no judgment. We do this every day. And for us, I try to come up with creative solutions that fit each person's goals. And we have such a diverse toolkit here at Frost. I think that makes us very special, because we have the tax department, we have planning, we have probate, we have all the different types of business lawyers, like everything that you could need. And so it's really nice to be part of a family that can provide so many different solutions tailored to people's problems.
Hearing somebody's situation and listening to them and tailoring the solution within the code to what they're saying and remind them of what they've said, that's what gets that comfort level up. I believe that you're going to talk to somebody here, whether it be in tax or estates or litigation or whatever, they're going to talk to you about how we can handle this situation, how your goals can be met, how we can solve problems. And I think that's the primary role of an attorney, is to help solve that particular problem that somebody's calling you about, and listening being the greatest tool.
Yeah, I agree. So I just want to thank you for coming on and chatting with me. I know we're reaching our time. I just want to say thank you. If you have a bankruptcy question or a tax question, or you're interested, please feel free to DM me or reach out. You can always visit our website at Frost Law. So thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Alyssa.